fan- Fantastic. Okay, we're right at the top of the hour, and I'd like to introduce our speaker and his subject. It's Jim Vetrano. I'll tell you a little bit about him just in a minute, but he's going to be talking about corporate clubs and some membership strategies there. And Jim lets us know that corporate clubs are a unique, they provide something unique. It's a level of service to their members that help them develop traditional Toastmaster and leadership skills and allow them to directly apply those skills at the companies and enhance in their careers. But there's a downside. Sometimes corporate clubs can mean corporate politics or competing priorities and members that just want to get home after a long day's work. So in this session, Jim will describe some of the techniques that have helped corporate clubs attract new members and keep existing members involved in the fold and continue to remain valuable resources to their members and companies. So Jim jumped at the chance to join Toastmasters in 2015 when the Rock the Talk Club started up at his office at Rockwell Automation in Mequon. He earned his pre-Pathways Competent Communicator, Competent Leadership Awards, and just this week, he returned back to Pathways with the prestigious Strategic Relationships Level 1 Award. So he's getting his hands into Pathways a little bit more. He's held several club officer positions. He was an area director last year, and he's currently the president of Rock the Talk. But he's also a remote member of the Intel Innovators based out of San Jose. There's a lot of other good information about Jim and his background, but I'll save that for later if we've got some more time, and you can go read on the district website. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jim for a presentation about a half an hour. Then, as we've done in the past, we'll get into some discussion and question and answer. So, Jim, you want to take it away?
Okay, well, thanks for the warm welcome, Keith, and thanks to all of you for attending. Again, today's topic is about corporate Toastmasters clubs and some things you can do to attract and better serve your members and get a return on your investment of time, dollars, or whatever it is. Again, my name is Jim Vetrano. This is the Club Support Seminar series, and I think Keith has covered a good amount of this slide, but I'll talk real briefly about it. Again, I'm the current president of Rock the Talk in Mequon. I'm a remote member of the club at Intel out of California. Last year, I was an area director, and in my area, 4 out of my 5 clubs ended up being company-based. And I'm sure I'm breaking a couple of Toastmasters rules here by having some interests beyond the club. Got a wife and 2 teenage sons. I've made my living as a firmware engineer doing cybersecurity. I have a little bit of a legal background, so I help people out with their legal problems at the Milwaukee Justice Center on occasion. My kids and I, we are a family of baseball umpires. They both played in our local Little League and continue to umpire. Other fun topics that get a little bit of my time: personal finance, ham radio, aviation, and telephones, both old and new. I'm starting to play with voice over IP a little bit. So that's me. Been around Toastmasters and corporate clubs for about 8 years now, and had a lot of fun in the process. So we might as well start off with everything okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Sorry, I thought I heard noise. With a little bit of a definition. Toastmasters doesn't have a real strong definition, and even District 35 has one that's pretty open-ended. They pretty much define a corporate club as one that runs out of a company or place of business, largely physically. And almost everything else is up to the club. Sometimes they're open, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're structured, sometimes they're more relaxed. The key thing, I think, is that there is flexibility both in your membership and your overall approach to the club. And much like that switch there on the right, it doesn't have to be fully on or fully off. You can raise or lower as needed, and you can continue to adjust it over time. So you've got that flexibility, and I think my point here is to take advantage of it. Do what makes sense for your club, do what makes sense for your company. Just remember it is still a Toastmasters club, and make sure that that feel somehow gets preserved. Obviously, these company-based clubs, there are some good points and bad points. One of the nice things is you've got a group of people with something in common. You've got a bunch of coworkers, you're all pulling oars, trying to make the ship hopefully go in the same direction. So you've got that in common to start with, and that's a big help. Oftentimes you have different levels of company support. You probably got a conference room, you probably got 1 hour a month out of the 160 that they allocate to have your meeting. Maybe it's an evening. You might have access to some other equipment, a company mailing list, a projector, or other things that just come with being at the company. And if you're lucky, maybe even got some funding from one of your sponsors. Rock the Talk has been pretty lucky in that regard. And I've seen how it helps and reduces what's otherwise a real common difficulty in a Toastmasters club, and that's renewal time. Toastmasters can also be a real nice, pleasant break to a string of meetings that just keeps going, maybe gets tense. Well, get to the end of one of those meetings and you walk into a Toastmasters meeting and hopefully the tone has changed a little bit. And that can be a real nice psychological benefit of its own. Some downsides, if it really is a company-based club, probably the reach ends at the front door of the building. There may or may not be ways to keep things going with people outside of the walls or topics outside of the walls. It really depends on the club. One thing that we've seen with Rock the Talk recently is when work gets really busy, well, it obviously takes priority. You're there at work, and sometimes people just have to make priority calls, and Toastmasters doesn't always win those. Work stuff can also kind of become the main topic of conversation at a Toastmasters meeting too, and that's maybe a slightly different form of suboptimal ways of doing things. Sometimes people just plain get busy. When you've got that long string of meetings, they start filling up the lunch hours, and people find they can't make the meetings. Or, as Keith pointed out in the intro, you get to 5 o'clock and nobody's got the stamina to continue going with the Toastmasters meeting. So the day ends and Toastmasters just doesn't happen there early in the evening sometimes. And maybe company politics rears its head. I haven't seen too much of that, but it can happen. So, thinking about publicity, which is one of the main things that people first think of when they're considering attracting members, I figure you've got two different types of publicity. You've got the kinds of things that the club does directly and the kinds of things that you kind of have to do through other channels. And we'll start with the direct publicity. One of the nice things about a corporate club is you have a bit of a captive audience. You have a bunch of people who come either in person or virtually to the same office every day. And if you can find a place to get your message out, they will see it fairly easily. That could be posters that your PR person makes up. That could be a company mailing list. That could be meeting invites on people's calendars. It could even be the old-fashioned personal touch, which is actually easier inside the walls than it is with a community club. A lot of the time you can just send somebody over to a member's desk and ask some questions if you need to. Another big thing that pops up with corporate clubs is you're all there, you all have a career, and almost all of you are probably interested in developing it. So you can put on some career development related content that will probably appeal to these members or will appeal to people who maybe want to drag into the club. Those could be presentation skill seminars, whether speechcraft or maybe something a little bit more tailored to your company. One thing that we've done for a few years at Rock the Talk, when we had our interns all come into the office pre-COVID. They would have to give an end of internship presentation to a bunch of high-level executives, and they had to stay on time, and they had to be able to answer questions. And it was a little bit of the pressure cooker for a 19-year-old, perhaps, who maybe has given a couple of talks at their university, but has never given one with this kind of audience with some real stakes. So we would help them practice and refine their presentations. If there's a bunch of interviewing going on, maybe some mock interviewing would help. We've done this a little bit ad hoc at Rock the Talk, where when people needed some interviewing help, we got them some. At Rockwell, there's another organization that does an executive meet and greet, but this would be another nice thing if it doesn't exist in your organization that Toastmasters could help put on. Now, again, this is a captive audience, and you can see the cartoon there at the right. The gentleman at the right with the newspaper doesn't seem like he's real interested in hearing the message, so the captive audience thing can be taken too far. Just kind of keep that in mind and make sure not to keep blathering on if you've said enough. In addition to these types of publicity, which are really not that different than any other type of club, you've got a whole bunch of company communications machinery that's also in place, and you may be able to use some of that to your advantage. One thing that you often hear when talking about how to manage or create change is to find somebody high up in the organization who can kind of sponsor the change, who can lend their support and convince people that what you're trying to change or what you're trying to do is important. And we've had a little bit of success with this with Rock the Talk too. We had a high-level sponsor. He was one of our engineering vice presidents who retired last year, but he gave us both financial support to cover people's dues and prizes and trinkets and meals on occasion, and moral support too, where he would on occasion come out and talk about the benefits of Toastmasters. And he even did this a couple of times with the district, where he came and gave a couple of presentations talking about the importance of communication skills. Looking back, he's retired now, so we now have a new sponsor, and we're in the process of kind of getting this moral support in place. One way I hope that we can improve that is if he can actually kind of pound the table a little bit within the company and perhaps bring up some of the benefits he's seen from his people in Toastmasters in various company meetings, so that he can kind of help spread the message and lend, again, his high-level support. Some larger companies have a network of employee resource groups, ERGs. Rockwell has these, Intel has these, a number of other companies have them. They might also be a good way to get your Toastmasters club plugged in. They often come with some strings attached or some limitations on what you can do. And I know Rock the Talk has avoided signing up for Rockwell's employee resource group program, but if it works well for your company and your club, it's worth a try. It gets you on HR's official radar screen and may get you a couple of additional platforms to spread your message. That's not the only HR platform you have available, though, too. HR typically runs some other communications, newsletters, announcement boards, TV screens in some cases. Actually, at Rockwell and Mequon, they put some of those things up right as COVID was getting started, and at least the last time I saw them, they were still displaying pre-COVID information. But once they get that going, that'll be another good place that meetings can be advertised. Maybe they'll take the place of posters, maybe they'll supplement the posters, but there are oftentimes message boards or other ways of getting your message out. Don't discount people paying attention to those. Probably the biggest thing on this list, as Toastmasters, we're out here doing things. We're winning awards. We're having victories here and there. Let's celebrate those, and let's make sure that Toastmasters is a part of the celebration. If somebody in your club, for example, has earned a promotion and presentation skills were a big part of that, if they're willing to give Toastmasters credit, let's make sure Toastmasters gets some credit. Similarly, if somebody has won an award, they've done well in a speech contest, they've even just finished a pathways level. See if you can celebrate that around the company too. I know within Rockwell, we tried to do this last year when two of our members did very well in the district speech contest, and we wrote up a really nice thing with pictures of them and quotes from them. Both of the people who placed well, and tried to get it published in one of HR's newsletters. In the end, they squashed us because they said it wasn't relevant to a large enough chunk of the population. But we did what we could. We fought the good fight. We we made up a nice thing and at least circulated it among our members. So some celebration happened, at least the amount that we could arrange. Most companies have some sort of performance review process, and usually that starts with some setting of goals for the following year. And at least at Rockwell, those goals include a category for personal development, and Toastmasters is a ready-made goal for that. Members, for example, can list the participation they plan to have or the progress they plan to make as a development goal in their performance review. And then it's a little bit of an accountability device. They've got to do that before the end of the year. It's also something that you can make available to managers if they find one of their people could benefit from presentation training or leadership experience. This is another way they can suggest some participation as a way to help develop their people. Another idea I've seen in a couple of places, oftentimes executives will have something of an official bio, and they'll typically list what they did at the company, their history in the company, the universities they went to, where they live, nonprofit boards they might be part of. And it occurred to me that if somebody's got a close enough tie to Toastmasters, they ought to list that in the official bio too. It makes just as much sense to be plugging a Toastmasters club as it does to be plugging the local dog shelter, for example. Might be an easy, very low cost way to try to raise the club's visibility. And remember, what are we here to learn? We're here to learn leadership, and we're here to learn communication primarily. Let's make every presentation count. And that really works in two directions. Number one, within Toastmasters, every presentation should count. If you've got to give a presentation about your project, have another Toastmaster there, get an evaluation, and have a count toward a path. That's one way. The other way is that, much like we often tell our members that their presentation skills reflect on themselves and reflect on Toastmasters, and like it or not, they're being graded a little bit. Let's make sure that they've got the proper opportunities to prepare and give the best possible presentation so they can make themselves and Toastmasters look good. Those are some ways that we can use the company's internal machinery to try to get our message out that maybe aren't necessarily available to community type clubs. So you've done a bunch of publicity and you've got a bunch of people in your meeting and maybe a few guests. How do you want to conduct your meeting? Well, first of all, if you're lucky, you've got a bunch of people from all sorts of different spots in the company. Maybe you've got the director, and you've got a bunch of engineers, and you've got a few people from the factory. And especially with that director in the room, it might be a little bit intimidating. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to set the tone that everybody's here to be a Toastmaster. Your title doesn't matter, your reputation doesn't matter, the kind of work you do doesn't matter. You're here to speak. You're here to learn. You're here to improve from wherever you are. You also have some unique experiences you can bring in and share. Maybe you spotted something in somebody's speech that other people haven't, and maybe you just want to raise your hand after the evaluation has happened and say, I've got one additional comment. And again, if people are here for career development primarily, let's make sure they understand how they can apply the different things that they're learning, the different feedback that they're getting, how it can help them in their careers. If your club is pulling people from around different areas of the company, you might have some issues where the time you pick your meeting doesn't work well for certain people's work schedules. I know at Rock the Talk, we had some issues at one point where our lunchtime meeting, the manufacturing people couldn't make, and we tried a late afternoon meeting, and it turned out to be not right after their shift ended, so they weren't able to make that without waiting around for an hour. So we had to shift our meeting times around a little bit to find something that worked pretty well. And especially in this era of remote meetings, if you hope to have people beyond just your local area, time zones matter too. My Intel club, for example, meets at noon Pacific time. That's 2 p.m. my time. No, that's not so bad. But if they hope to catch somebody from Europe, that might be 9 p.m. for the guy in France. Um, if you hope to grab people from around the world, yeah, the time zones will take a little bit of planning to make something that works overall. Again, try to keep politics out of this as much as you possibly can. There are a couple things you probably still want to be able to do. You still want to have a little bit of fun with what's going on at work. So if somebody needs to crack a little bit of a joke about some political situation, as long as it doesn't go too far, great. You might also hit a situation where somebody has taken the every presentation counts advice to heart and wants to give a dry run of the presentation. It might be a politically charged topic. I would say let them give the dry run in front of a Toastmasters meeting, get the feedback, get the benefit of the feedback and the practice. And if there's somebody who's going to be asked to give a presentation on the other side of the same division or decision rather, maybe you give them equal time. But again, the goal is for people once they're up there in front of the room where it matters to give the best possible presentation they can. One thing that happens with company culture, some people say you either actively choose one or you get one by default. And your club is really not going to be that different. If you don't choose something different, you'll probably find the club culture you get is about 2/3 of your company's cultures and your culture, and 1/3 of Toastmasters' culture. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want something slightly different. You might want the meeting to run extra professionally and mirror your company's culture. You might just want the breath of fresh air where it feels different, and maybe you want a slightly different culture. So it is something worth talking about within your officer group, within your membership, and figuring out what culture you think would work best. And remember, you had a couple of guests in this meeting too, and they are still probably the most important people in the room. They are your most likely next members. You want to encourage them, you want to follow up with them, and you want to convert them if at all possible, just like any other club. One question that's come up a few times is, do you really need this corporate club to be a fully closed club? And I think there are a couple of situations where you do, and a number of situations where you probably don't. Probably the biggest one where you do is if a lot of the topics are about work. If you're going to be talking about the status of your brand new product under development, then that's going to be confidential. You're probably not going to want outsiders in that meeting. On the other hand, if you can benefit from maybe people from other Toastmasters clubs or people from completely outside of Toastmasters coming in and giving their new perspective and their different approaches, if that would benefit your club, that's worth encouraging. And you can do that even as visitors rather than having to actually make a longer term change in how your membership runs. But I think there are some benefits if you allow some of the new blood in, if possible. A couple things that you do want to think about are the logistics. You want to make sure people can actually get into the office. That at Rock the Talk, that's meant our sergeant at arms oftentimes has to go meet our guest or our visitor at the front door and bring them into the meeting. Or maybe it means making sure that people can participate using Microsoft Teams, even if they're not in the company directory. We've found that Teams works pretty well. I think Zoom would work better yet. But Teams does have a couple of limitations for people outside of the company. For example, you can't see or transfer files. You can see pictures, you can chat, you can join meetings, you can have video, but you can't do absolutely everything that the people inside the company can do. Again, for good reason. They're trying to protect their data. They don't know that this documents a Toastmasters agenda rather than the secret product development plans. If you go far with this, you might have two different forms of publicity. You might have the things that you were doing inside the company, and you might find a need to extend it outside the company. And you'll want to think a little bit about how that would be done. You might find that your public relations person is already pretty busy and doesn't have time for 2 rounds of PR. Maybe they get a little help for that. Maybe there are additional resources you need, and that impacts how you raise money. Maybe you need a couple extra dollars around for some additional materials. One fun story from Rock the Talk we had a we had a webmaster who actually created an outside website for Rock the Talk, and promptly got pulled into the IT security manager's office and told, you can't do that. But it's a completely outside website. It's got nothing to do with Rockwell Automation. Like, we don't care. It's got our employees' names on it. We don't want people to find our employees and recruit them or socially engineer them because they found their name on a Toastmasters website. And he ended up having to take it down. So publicity is a little bit of a double-edged sword. You might find the company is a little bit interesting about some aspects of that publicity. Or sometimes other things happen. Toastmasters in control. Just before I picked up as area director, including their club, their company, Johnson Controls, split into two. Johnson Controls stuck around and Clarios was formed. Their response to that was to become a full community club, and now anybody can join them. Rock the Talk and Mech One, and then I prompted a little bit of a change there when I changed jobs. They ended up voting to expand the membership criteria to allow former people to stay in, and I'm grateful for that. Keith might talk a little bit about how the AB Downtown Club became an open club. It apparently has been a completely open one for a while, and he says the story's too long to share here, so maybe we'll do it in the Q&A session.
Yep.
I also had a couple of corporate clubs while I was area director that unfortunately folded due to COVID. One of them was essentially already defunct at the beginning of the year, and the other one was just hanging on and eventually folded themselves. But they both got as much support as I in the district could give them. They weren't all that receptive to support at the time. In the end, they decided they were going to fold. So the best thing we could do is just make sure that their members knew where else they could go, other community clubs there where they'd be welcomed. And it's a situation I think we all wish could have had a happier result, but we did the best we could with what we had. So, again, some things to think about whether you need to actually be a fully closed club or if you can open up some. There's some good benefits from opening up some or all the way. And that brings us to, I guess, really the top few items to kind of pack in your lunchbox and take on into the office. The first one is, obviously, this is still Toastmasters. Still make sure it feels like Toastmasters, but feel free to put your own spin on it, whatever makes sense for what your club and your company are trying to accomplish with Toastmasters. You've got a lot of the same publicity tools that other types of clubs do, and you've got a lot of the same recruitment challenges too. So don't forget that you can do the same kinds of things that community clubs can do. Plus, you've got the additional tools that being part of the same company gives you. I think the big things here are, one, remember that people are largely there for career development, so take advantage of that. Two, again, stay welcoming to anybody at any level and any type of work that wanders into the door. They're all members, they're all Toastmasters, they all get to learn. And three, keep your eye out around the company and in your Toastmasters experience for things that work better and things that don't work as well, and use what works. Back at Rockwell, we had a couple of people who used to say you need to be agile about your agile development, and what they meant by that was essentially use what works. Take a look around, see what works, use more of that. See what doesn't work, use less of that. Just get better and better over time. And finally, remember, you've got lots of options. Again, that switch doesn't have to be fully on, fully off. You can be fully closed, you can be fully open, or you can be somewhere in between. You have some options, and you have options that can change over time. So just keep those in mind. Hopefully they will help your club, even with the constraints of a corporate club, serve your members better and continue to get members, new members in. That's all I've got. So wanted to thank you for attending and see if any of you have got questions, comments, other thoughts.
Yuri's always got the first questions. Go ahead, Yuri.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Definitely full of interesting and thoughtful information. I wrote down 3 questions. I'll ask one of them first and let someone else go. My question is, what I wrote down, what stood out to me was the example you gave about the individuals that did well at the contest last year. And what I kind of wrote down was that their success was not well received or not well, I suppose, acknowledged or recognized by the corporate community, corporate environment. And he said, wrote down, it was not relevant to large population, I'm assuming within the company. What, in your opinion, was one or maybe one more factors that contributed for some reason to that not being recognized by the overall company? Was it something that was not done well, or is it something that was simply not just, we just don't care enough to acknowledge that?
Yeah, I think the big thing there wasn't necessarily that, I don't think it was that it wasn't done well. I got the feedback I got even from the same HR people was the people did really well with their speeches. It turned out one of them actually had a video of their speech recorded too. So they were actually able to, it was actually able to be watched later. The article I actually got a bunch of compliments on, even from some people who are professional writers. I think the big thing is they just viewed Toastmasters as still kind of this little small subgroup of a 20,000 person company. I'm trying to think, but there are probably a couple of hundred people who are members of different Toastmasters clubs around Rockwell. I don't know the exact numbers anymore, but that would be but that would be my guess. And I think, I mean, if there were anything that could have made that go a little bit differently, I think there's maybe two things. One is, if that publicity had been going on earlier, and maybe the newsletter people had heard about Toastmasters before, that might have raised the visibility to the point where they were willing to run an article about it. It would have just felt like it fit right in with other things like, hey, this product won this award, or this person got this big promotion, or some other interesting personal interest story, which also they tend to run with. The other thing that perhaps could have helped was, again, going back to that sponsorship thing, I didn't think of this at the time, but I wonder if our sponsor had sent that same message, if he might have gotten a better or different response than when I sent the message.
Yep. Sometimes it's a matter of who's asking the question, not what the question is or what the promotion is, because as Jim mentioned, there's probably a couple hundred people out of 20,000 that are in Toastmasters, but they missed the point that this isn't a message for Toastmasters. This is a message for the 20,000 other people in the company that could see the accomplishments of their co-workers, right? So, I mean, we've got plenty of things where the number of people that are directly impacted are small, but the message is bigger. This was one of them, and I think I'd agree with Jim. I think it was probably the latter that didn't get us, the latter of his two ideas that didn't get it promoted. But yeah, we did the best that we could with what we had, right? All right, Susan, I think you had your hand up next.
I did. Coming from a corporate club previous to the one that I'm in now, which is a community club, I was a member for 13 years, and I just want to share a couple of other things that we did to promote our Toastmasters club within the company. First of all, we decided that we almost had a no budget. The company did give us a little bit of money, but we kind of had to use our brains to get innovative and creative. So we would take name tents that we used for Direct Supply University, and we would put information about Toastmasters on it. We would go and put them in the common areas that the employees use, such as the lunch rooms, the kitchens. There was one or two kitchens in every campus building, and there were 9 campus buildings, plus one down at MSOE. We also linked up with our corporate university. So I taught a presentation strategies class. And one of the things that I would do at the end is say, don't let this be the end of your practice. Did you know we have Toastmasters, and you can practice at any time and link your speeches to things that are in the track that you're working on. So back at that time, they were just switching over to pathways, but it still was the same.
I think we lost.
Oh, that was
Sorry,
quick.
I think that's my fault.
Oh, thanks, Jim.
I was
we
trying to
just
mute
lost
myself and
about,
I muted you.
I think we just lost about the last 10, 15 seconds. That's all.
Oh, okay. So I'll go on to the next point. You got the thing about linking it to corporate university. We also used a link to our new employee orientation. So if available, a Toastmaster would come in during one of the sessions and say, hey, just here to do a walkthrough. And literally we would have them walk in one door and go out the other and say, we've got a club called Toastmasters International. If you haven't heard from it, and you'd be talking as you walk through. And of course, the leader of that session knew that was going to happen, especially if you were a Toastmaster yourself. Get it also in the information that you give to your new employees in the handout that they receive, so that they have not only an application, but they get the kind of like the true stuff about how the club runs and how to get in touch. And then the last thing is there are usually company events. So at Direct Supply, which was the company I was with, we had functions throughout the year. We always had a booth where you could not necessarily compete, but you could get your name out there with other organizations that were set up socially for employees. And we would participate in, for example, the summer barbecue, where you had hundreds of people coming and walking through the parking lot, getting food and looking at the exhibits and listening to speakers and music. We had at the Halloween party, we would put one of our halls open to everybody. If you brought 3 cans of donated food, you got in for free, or it was cost you $3. And when they were done eating or before they were eating, they could walk from booth to booth and get information and a lot of free Halloween candy. So those are a few suggestions on how else to advertise at the corporate environment.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I knew I could count on you as somebody who would share. Tony, you have a question or?
Yeah, I look at it from a slightly different perspective. I worked for a company, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Maryland, that had a specific goal. They wanted to reduce the number of new hires that didn't make it past their first 6 months. That was one goal. The second goal is they wanted to enhance interdepartmental communication between different departments that were acting as silos. So what they did was they paid a corporate charter fee for the club. They also had a sponsor who was the director of HR for the company. And starting with the corporate charter meeting, they had a meeting where people from the corporation were helping shape the culture of the company. So it of the club, so it coincided with what they wanted to do as a company or a division of a company. The project was successful for about 2-3 years. And then there was a mass downsizing. That was the end of the club. But the club got up to 40-45 members because people in the club wanted to belong to the club. It's different insight. I also mentioned that Ayers Toastmasters is a club located in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They have members of Ayers who are at multiple different sites all over the state, all over the country, and they all join the meetings. And it's a way of getting people who are engineers and architects to work together on projects and share best practices.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Tony. Todd, you've had your hand up for a bit. So question, comment?
I was going to say that, so I used to be with the Royal Bank of Canada, and I was trying to get a club in one of the call centers. And what really worked was getting the VP of training on board as our champion, because once we were able to get him on board, the whole training division was endorsing it and getting people behind it. So maybe you don't want to just look at HR. You want to look at maybe if a company's large enough that they have their own training division, this is a supplemental kind of training. And if you do it like as a cost analysis versus any of the other like Fred Pryor, Skill Path, Dale Carnegie, whatever, you could chart our whole club for the cost of one executive going to a one-day event with one of those other companies. I also wanted to say that Pat Johnson has a really good handout. Pat Johnson, one of the international past presidents, created a whole book on how to do get into corporate clubs. I think Teresa even has a copy of it.
All right, thank you, Todd. The topic did come up in Jim's presentation about how the Rockwell Milwaukee Club transitioned, and I'll share a little bit of the story because I think bits and pieces of it might be useful for other corporate clubs on their journey, or even if they're starting. So this corporate club started in 1965. From 1965 to 2005, it was funded by our recreation department. It was viewed as a club, like the golf club or the tennis club, or the investment club, or something like that. And it was primarily focused from the factory. Even when I started in '88, it was mostly factory people. And when I say the club was funded by the rec department, I mean everything. So we would all dues, of course, all supplies, anything like that we needed. We had an annual banquet in the executive dining room every year, and after every meeting, we had dinner brought in from our cafeteria. So it was incredibly well supported. Then budgets get tight, right? And so around about 2005, the director of our training and development, corporate training and development, said, why isn't Toastmasters funded from our organization? Our goals are aligned. And it was a fantastic idea. This gentleman was a former Toastmaster himself, and he also asked the question, why are you just restricting it to employees? Why don't you open it up and get some fresh air? Let some fresh air in the door. So we did. Unfortunately, it was only a few years later when recession hit, and this individual lost his job, and the Toastmaster budget was transferred to a person who knew nothing about Toastmasters, and our budget was cut completely. So we had to make a decision. Do we want to fold? I was the club president at the time. Do we want to fold, or do we want to look at another funding model? And so we went to what our current funding model is, and that is every member, internal or external, pays their own dues. And then it's up to each individual member to have a conversation with their manager about the benefits of Toastmasters. And do you see this as part of my personal development? And I've yet to, in 15 years, I've yet to see a single manager that thinks one of their employees isn't worth $90 a year. So that's been pretty successful. Also, the opening up, we've at the most we've ever had at any given time is maybe 2 or 3 members that are outside of the company. Oftentimes, if somebody leaves the company, at least for a little while, they'll retain their membership, and then but people from the community who maybe are from much smaller companies, or maybe are looking for opportunities to network, have been attracted to our club. So those are all things that little bits and pieces of that might work at other corporate clubs. All right, I think, Tom, you had your hand up. Do you still have a question or comment?
Membership decline is universal nationwide, not just in our organization. Has that been an issue with corporate clubs?
Well,
I would say, yeah,
yeah.
I would definitely say yes. Although I think its impact is probably a little bit more hit and miss. I think of those couple of corporate clubs I mentioned before that folded during COVID, and obviously their membership dwindled in one case to 0, in the other case to 1. Rock the Talk, it went down just a little bit, but not as much as you would think. I think that's due to a few factors. One, this was all still happening during the workday. 2, we had found a way to work and communicate and do all the kinds of things that we need both for work and for Toastmasters remotely. So anybody who was working remotely at least still had a connection to the rest of the communities that they had before. That helped immensely. Probably the other big help, again, too, with our club was the fact that we had funding too. I don't think that I don't know. It would have been interesting to see how many of our members would have stayed on if it were their $90 instead of Rockwell's $90 to pay. It's not that much money as a non-employee, but a member of Rock the Talk. I pay for my own membership as it is now. So some folks probably would have, maybe some would have thought twice. Again, you read some of the economic press and they talk about how people were saving their money and having less big ticket things to spend on. Nobody's taking a big vacation. So maybe it was easier for them to find $90 for Toastmasters if they needed to. Wasn't a factor for us though. Other clubs, I'm not sure if maybe the downtown club, maybe had a different experience, maybe.
Well, I was gonna call on Jason because I know he's a member of a corporate club, and I think your membership has possibly declined a little, but it's still very strong relative to other clubs.
Yeah, my response, Keith, was going to be it depends. And it depended on how the club reacted and how the company reacted, particularly to the pandemic. So I can bring a couple different perspectives because I'm in the trio, so I know kind of what's going on in the district. But I also, as Keith said, my home club is a corporate club. You know, my primary club at Northwestern Mutual, the main Northwestern Mutual Club, has just as many members now as it did ever. You know, we're at 38 members today. The highest we've ever been is 45. The lowest we've ever been is 18. The main thing I think that changed for us is when we switched to virtual first and now hybrid, that opened the door to us allowing members that weren't on our campus, weren't at the headquarters in Milwaukee. We now have members that are at our New York office, a lot of members that are remote. We actually often right now, the virtual attendees outweigh our in-person attendees because we have a higher percentage that are not at the corporate headquarters that have joined the club. So that's created some different dynamics. Other clubs that have had either corporate affiliations or very strong ones or weak affiliations, it depended on their company's approach. Toast of Milwaukee, that's another club that's in division, or was a club in D3 down in downtown Milwaukee, across the street from Northwestern Mutual and US Bank Tower, affiliated with US Bank. When the pandemic started, US Bank said all non-essential things are stopping from a corporate level. That included Toastmasters. And their club was not allowed to meet. And 2 dues periods passed of the company saying they're not allowed to meet and they no longer have a club. Everything in that gamut, is the reality. I think it's all about, again, what some of what you talked about, how you're relating it to what the company's doing, how you are partnering with HR or training or those other areas to at least, or ERGs or whatever, to at least justify your existence. And it takes both, is how I like to describe it. The company can't have a club without the members, and the members can't have the club without the company. Both have to work together in some fashion. And when they're both working together, that's when I think really cool stuff happens. Because if you have one or the other that's either non-existent primarily, but particularly you need the members always, even if the company's passionate about it. If you have no passionate members, it still will die. And that's a thing I've also seen from looking at it from a trio perspective. So there's a lot of it, like everything, there's a lot of it depends. There's a lot of still, sweat, blood, and tears of members and of people to keep their clubs alive out there. And I think that's, part of what it's about, and a gigantic learning experience, I think, as well. That's kind of what I wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you. And Teresa, you've got your hand up, and I know you have some experience with corporate clubs as well.
Yeah, one thing that happens with some corporate clubs is the company will pay, and then if people don't show up, there's no splashback or whatever.
Accountability, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much. With the clubs that I've been in, we've been expected to actually, perform roles, attend the meetings, reach educational goals, and, do numbers of speeches over the course of a specific time period. And then if we've done any of those things, we get the reimbursement. So we've got the buy-in from the corporate, but then we've also got people who are buying into their own education rather than having a handout from the corporation. And it sort of kind of helps people stay more involved instead of a bunch of paper members.
Yeah, my corporate club downtown Milwaukee was about to move in that position to establish some minimum requirements either for attendance or participation when the training team stepped in and said, "Oh, we'll take it all over." Oh, we could have gone there too. Yuri, you had another question or comment?
Oh, yes. Kind of recalling what you mentioned, Keith, about corporate clubs, including community members from the community, and something that Jim mentioned about Toastmasters in control, to where they are a mix of both corporate and community members. I'm curious. It sounds like Toastmasters in control had success in becoming a more of a mix of corporate and community, as did a Rockwell one. What do you think was done well enough to get to have this mix without giving the challenges you mentioned about exposing employees' names to outside public, which led to the shutdown of the website?
Well, I can speak to what I saw during my time as area director. If anybody knows any of the subsequent history over the 8 months that followed, that might be useful too. But what I saw at the time with Toastmasters in Control in particular is that their membership was probably still almost exclusively from those two companies. It couldn't be limited to just one company anymore, but it was still almost all Johnson Controls or Clarios people, or maybe a couple of visits here and there from other people from around Toastmasters. I know they were also a little bit concerned about how many members they had and how many active members they had. And one of the things I tried to encourage them to do was to take advantage of the fact that they were this open club and maybe do a little bit of publicity out in the community. I never really saw where that went before my time ran out, which is why I'm curious if anybody has seen more since. At least with them, they didn't have the same privacy paranoia that Rock the Talk's IT overlords did. That came from Rock the Talk. I suppose the privacy of employees' names is somewhat important, although remember there's this other thing called LinkedIn, and I'll bet you 90% of the people had their name and the fact that they worked for that same company online on LinkedIn, and that didn't result in any complaints. So how valid the concern was, I guess, is up for debate, but it's one of those areas where the golden rule applies. The people with the gold made the rules.
Tom, you had a comment?
Some of you belong to both a corporate and a community club. If for some reason you could only belong to one, which would it be?
Well, that's easy for me. It would be a community, because as much as I like my corporate club, and I've had a very happy almost 27 years now, that day is going to come to a close, right? Hopefully I'm not going to work there till I die. But I want to continue in Toastmasters, even though technically since my club is open. It's a corporate culture, but if I only had one, it would be a community club.
Can you say why?
I would say more diversity.
Okay.
Yeah. And not to say that my corporate club doesn't have diversity. I mean, there's different types of diversity. Okay. So, I mean, there have been times in that club where over 50% of the members did not have English as their second language. Even though it's a, you might think of Rockwell as kind of an engineering club, and there's a lot of people that are engineers. We have a lot of other people there as well, finance and human resources and supply chain and sales, and yeah, they're not all engineers. So yeah, there's diversity there, but I think you'll find more diversity of personalities than in a community club. Jason?
I was going to answer Tom's question because my answer is a little different than yours,
Yeah.
Keith.
Yeah.
I have the privilege and the responsibility of being a charter member of my corporate club as well. So for me, if I had to drop one, I would drop my community club first because I've been a member longer of my corporate club, as well as my corporate club, while being a closed club, it does allow retirees. So we do have one or two active retirees that have remained active because we do have a very active retiree community at our company because we maintain very long-term ties with our employees. And that's Jason and HR talking a little bit too. As many of you know, I work in human resources, but I don't own Toastmasters, and that's purposeful because I try very hard to not have a conflict of interest about how I feel about Toastmasters. It's owned by one of my peers. And they sometimes make decisions I don't agree with, but that's fine with me. But for me, that tie of the very first Toastmasters club I ever walked into was the organizational meeting of my corporate club. And I've been an officer every year that my club has existed. As long as I can do that, I'm going to do that.
Okay, great. Okay, we are closing in on the top of the hour, and I'll just say selfishly, I've been doing Toastmasters for 7 hours straight today. So, yeah, Yuri,
You've done your part.
it's one of those days. It's good. It's good, but like to spend some time with my wife too. Yuri, are you going to host a after hours party?
I mean, I know Todd put the link in the chat. If anyone
There it is.
join, please copy before we all leave. Please copy that link or the chat, and then if you'd like to go there and join, there'll probably be me for a little bit, and it'll be Todd. But it's available once again. Additional questions, further feedback, whatever you wish to share, and then we can go from there. But to respect everyone's time, let's go ahead and adjourn at our normal time. And the link is in the chat to the Zoom meeting. Please join us if you'd like to.
Yes, thanks Todd for hosting that. I think it's a valuable outlet for continued discussion that we can carry on beyond a 1 hour time frame. So appreciate that. And the rest of you have a good evening, and we'll see you back in a couple of weeks.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you, Keith. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you all
everyone.
for spending your evening with us.